Hey, welcome back to English Through Stories. I'm Elio, the podcast where we learn English the way it was always meant to be learned. Not from a textbook, not from a grammar chart on the wall, but from real stories. Stories with real people, real emotions, and real mistakes.
And I'm Maya. That's right. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. We're so glad you found us. This podcast is for you if you're learning English and you want to actually feel the language, not just memorize it. Because there's a difference, right, Eliel?
A huge difference. Memorizing English is like looking at a photo of a beach. You can see the water, you can see the sand, but you can't feel the sun on your skin or the salt in the air. Stories do that. They put you inside the language.
I love that. Okay, I have to say, I've been thinking about today's episode all week. Like, since you told me the story we were going to use today, I could not stop thinking about it.
Really? Why?
Because it involves something that every English learner fears, right? We're all afraid of saying the wrong thing, especially at work, especially in front of a boss, especially when the stakes are high. And today's story, it has all of that. But then the ending completely surprised me.
It surprised me too when I first heard about it. And I think it's going to surprise our listeners. So without giving too much away, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Before we get into the story, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a city you might know, Houston, Texas. It's a warm Tuesday in October, and the kind of heat that makes you feel like the air itself is tired. Inside a tall office building downtown, the air conditioning is running at full power, but nobody is cool, not today. Today, a marketing team at a mid-sized technology company has been sitting in a conference room for 2 hours and 47 minutes. There are 12 people around the table, 12 laptops, 12 coffees, some finished, some forgotten, and 12 different levels of stress. At the far end of the table, near the window, there is a woman named Valentina Cruz. Valentina is 31 years old. She was born in Monterrey, Mexico. She grew up in a house where her father ran a small hardware store and her mother taught Spanish literature at the local university. She was a good student, a careful student, the kind of girl who read every question twice before answering, who organized her notebooks by color, who, at 17, decided she was going to study abroad and build a life in another language. And she did. She went to university in the United States on a scholarship. She worked harder than almost anyone around her. She learned English, not just the grammar, but the rhythm of it, the culture of it, the unspoken rules of it. Or so she thought. By 31, she had a good job, a real job, a job with her name on the door, her business card, her parking spot in the garage. She was the marketing manager for product launches at a company called TechBridge Solutions. It wasn't a perfect job, no job is, but it was hers, and she had worked for every centimeter of it. Her boss was a man named Richard Connolly. Richard was 53 years old, originally from Boston, and had the kind of professional confidence that fills a room before the person does. He was not a bad man. He was direct, demanding, the type of person who made fast decisions and expected other people to keep up. Some people found him inspiring. Some people found him exhausting. Valentina found him both, depending on the day. And on this particular Tuesday in October, she was finding him exhausting. The meeting had started at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was supposed to last 90 minutes. But Richard had called the meeting because the quarterly campaign numbers were not good. The numbers were not just not good, they were embarrassing. The click-through rates were down, the conversion rates were down. The whole product launch strategy from the previous quarter had underperformed by nearly 30%. And Richard wanted answers. He had been asking questions for 2 hours and 47 minutes. Not gentle questions, not collaborative questions, the kind of sharp, precise questions that feel less like questions and more like accusations, even when they're not meant to be. Valentina, he had said about an hour in, walk me through the decision to launch in September when the data suggested October was a stronger window. And she had walked him through it, carefully, with numbers, with context, with the reasons that made complete sense at the time. And the influencer campaign, he had said 20 minutes later, who approved the targeting parameters? She had answered that too. She had answers for everything, because she had done everything. She had been awake at 6 in the morning reviewing data. She had been in the office until 9 some nights. She cared, deeply. And now, sitting at that conference table, watching each answer she gave get pulled apart and examined like it was a piece of evidence in a trial, she was starting to feel something she didn't like feeling, something she had spent years not to feel in professional settings. She was starting to feel small. Her stomach was tight. Her hands, folded on the table in front of her, felt stiff. She could feel the other people in the room watching her, doing the calculation people always do in those moments. Is she going to break? Is she going to cry? Is she going to quit? Richard had moved on to a new document on the projector screen, a competitor analysis. He was pointing at figures. He was asking about market positioning. And his questions were coming faster now, rapid fire, the way a river speeds up when the channel narrows. Valentina was answering, but she was also processing 3 other things at the same time. She was thinking about a data point she had spotted in the report that didn't match what Richard was saying. She was trying to remember the specific budget allocation from March, and she was becoming increasingly aware that she needed to address a significant misunderstanding that had developed in the last 15 minutes, a misunderstanding that, if left uncorrected, was going to lead this entire meeting in the wrong direction. She needed a moment. She needed everyone to just pause, just for a second, just long enough for her brain to catch up with her mouth and for her to put this correction together properly. Richard was still speaking. His voice was filling the room. His voice always filled the room. And Valentina, who was overwhelmed, who was exhausted, who was running on 3 cups of coffee and too little sleep, who grew up speaking Spanish and learned English brilliantly and carefully and sometimes imperfectly, Valentina opened her mouth and she said, "Richard, can you just stop?" The room went silent.
And not the kind of polite silence, the total kind, the kind that feels like someone has pressed a pause button on the whole world. 12 people around the table stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. 2 people looked at the ceiling, 1 person looked at their phone just to have somewhere to look, and Richard Connolly, who had not been interrupted in a meeting in years, turned to look at Valentina Cruz. She felt the full weight of those 4 words the instant they left her body. Can you just stop? Not excuse me, not sorry, could I just, not Richard, I wonder if I could jump in for a moment. Just stop. She felt her face go hot. She felt her heart do something alarming, and she thought, in the crystal clear way that your brain works in moments of pure panic, oh no, that is not what I meant to say. That is not, I did not mean it like that. I was not trying to be rude. I was not trying to be disrespectful. I just needed a second, a breath, a pause. But the words were out, and the room was still silent. And then Richard Connolly did something nobody expected. He stopped talking. He looked at Valentina for a long moment, and then he sat back in his chair, slowly, deliberately, the way a man sits back when he is genuinely surprised and is trying to process it. He tapped the table once with 2 fingers, and he said, quietly, almost to himself, "Okay." He nodded. "Go ahead," he said. And Valentina, who had approximately 1 second to decide whether to apologize, cry, explain herself, or simply proceed, because what else could she do? She was already on the edge. The only direction was forward. She corrected the misunderstanding, clearly, with data, with the confidence of someone who actually knew what she was talking about, even if her hands were shaking under the table where nobody could see. She addressed the data point that didn't match. She redirected the conversation, and when she was done, the room felt different. The meeting ended 40 minutes later, more quietly than it had started. Richard thanked the team. He said they had some things to think about. He said he'd follow up with individual conversations throughout the week. Valentina gathered her things. She was very focused on not making eye contact with anyone. She was very focused on getting to the elevator without her legs giving out. She made it to the elevator. She pressed the button for the 7th floor, her floor. The doors closed, and then she leaned against the back wall of that elevator and closed her eyes and said, very softly in Spanish, words we will not translate here, but which her mother would have recognized immediately. She spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon convincing herself she was about to be fired. She refreshed her email 17 times between 4 and 5 o'clock. She reread the HR handbook. She rehearsed 2 different versions of what she would say if Richard called her into his office, one in which she apologized and one in which she resigned with dignity, which, in her mind, involved a very calm handshake and walking out without crying. And then at 5:12 on Tuesday afternoon in October, in her office in Houston, Texas, with the air conditioning running and the light going orange outside the window, her email made a sound. It was from Richard. The subject line was, "Great meeting today." She read it 3 times and then a 4th time, because in the first 3 readings she was certain she was misunderstanding. But no, it said what it said. It said, "Valentina, I wanted to reach out before end of day. Today's meeting was productive, and I thought you handled the pressure well. You have a strong read on the data, and you weren't afraid to redirect the conversation when it needed redirecting. I've been thinking about the senior director role we discussed in Q2. I'd like to move that conversation forward. Can we set up a 30-minute meeting this week? R." She read it 5 more times. She did not cry in the meeting, but she did cry a little alone at her desk at 5:14 on a Tuesday afternoon in October in her office in Houston, Texas, with the air conditioning running and the light going orange outside the window. Because she had done something wrong. She had said something she didn't mean to say the way she said it. She had lost control of her register under pressure, reached for a word, or rather a phrase, that felt instinctive and immediate, without fully measuring how it would land in that room, in that culture, in that moment. And somehow, against all logic, against everything she had feared, it had changed everything.
Okay, I need a moment.
Take all the time you need.
That story, I felt that story in my chest. Like from the beginning when they described her at the table with her hands folded, trying not to feel small. I know that feeling. I think every person learning a second language knows that feeling.
Yes, the feeling of doing everything right, studied hard, prepared thoroughly, showed up, and still being terrified that one word is going to undo all of it.
And then those 4 words just came out.
Can you just stop?
Right. And the room went silent, and I was reading along, and my stomach actually dropped, like a little bit of free fall.
Good storytelling does that. It puts you in the room.
It really did. But okay, let's talk about what actually happened there, because I feel like there are 2 layers. There's what Valentina thought she was saying and what the room heard, and they were completely different.
Completely different. And this is the core of today's lesson right here. This is what we want to sit with for a moment. So let's slow it down. What did Valentina actually want to say?
She wanted to say, pause, like, give me a second, I need to think. Don't keep talking because I can't catch up and I have something important to add.
Exactly. She wanted a pause. She wanted the mental equivalent of pressing the pause button on a video. And in English, especially in formal or professional settings, there are very specific ways to ask for that. She knew some of them. She had used them before in calmer moments, in normal conversations. Things like, "Sorry, could I jump in here?" Or, "Can I add something?" Or, "Just a moment, I want to make sure I'm addressing this correctly."
But in that moment, under all that pressure, with her brain running at full speed,
she didn't reach for those phrases. She reached for something shorter, something that in Spanish or in very casual English would mean exactly what she intended, just stop, as in pause, as in hold on a second.
Can you just stop? In Spanish, that would be like para un momento, just stop for a second. It's not rude, it's just quick, direct, informal.
And that's the key word, informal, because in English, and this is really important for our listeners, "can you just stop" is not a neutral phrase. It carries weight. It carries emotion. It's the kind of thing you say to someone when you're frustrated with them, when they've been doing something repeatedly that's bothering you. "Can you just stop doing that?" It's a phrase with a very specific emotional temperature.
But in a professional context, with your boss in front of the whole team,
It lands as something completely different than what she meant. To everyone in that room, it wasn't a request for a pause. It was an assertion, a drawing of a line. And in the culture of that particular corporate environment, in front of a boss like Richard, who respected confidence, it read as exactly the kind of boldness he had been waiting to see from her.
which is wild because she was terrified and he was impressed.
She was terrified precisely because she knew she'd done something wrong by the standards of formal English communication, and he was impressed precisely because by his standards she had finally stopped deferring.
Good. So there's a whole spectrum. On the softer end, you have, "I'm sorry, could I just add something here?" Or, "I want to make sure I'm following this correctly. Could we back up for just a second?" That second one is particularly good because it reframes the pause as something helpful, not just for you, but for the conversation. You're not saying, "I can't keep up." You're saying, "I want to make sure we get this right."
Oh, that's clever. It's almost like you're doing the room a favor.
Exactly. Moving toward the middle of the spectrum, slightly more assertive, but still very professional, you have, "Hold on, I think there's something important here I want to address." The "hold on" is a bit more direct, but it's paired with a reason. There's something important I want to address, and that reason justifies the interruption.
And toward the more assertive end?
If you're in a culture that values directness, or with a manager you know well, you can say, "Richard, I need a moment. I want to make sure I'm responding to this accurately." That's confident. It's clear. It shows respect for the conversation while also claiming space in it.
I love "I need a moment." That's so clean.
It is. And what all of these phrases have in common, this is the pattern I want listeners to notice, is that they signal awareness. They communicate, "I know I'm changing the direction of this conversation, and I'm doing it intentionally and respectfully, not carelessly or emotionally."
Versus, "can you just stop?" which doesn't signal any of that. It just arrives, like a firework that nobody lit on purpose.
That is a perfect description. It arrives with no context, no softener, no explanation, and then the room has to figure out what to do with it.
Okay, I want to do some example sentences now because I think that's really helpful for our listeners to hear these in context. Can we do a few?
Let's do it.
So, imagine you're in a work meeting and your manager is explaining a new process, but they're going so fast you're losing track. What do you say?
Great scenario. So you might say, "Sorry, could you slow down for just a second? I want to make sure I'm getting this right." Natural, professional, completely respectful. Or if it's a bit more casual, a bit more of a familiar relationship, "Actually, hold on, I want to write that last part down." The "actually" signals a gentle pivot. The reason you give, "I want to write that down," makes it feel practical and intentional.
What about if someone in a meeting says something you think is factually incorrect? Like there's wrong information being presented and you need to correct it.
Ooh, that's a delicate one. In that situation, tone matters enormously. You don't want to embarrass anyone, but you also can't let the misinformation stand. A good phrase there is, "Can I just add something here? I think the figure you're referencing might be from last quarter. The current number is actually closer to X." You're not saying they're wrong, you're adding something. You're making a gentle correction that gives them room to receive it without losing face.
That's such a culturally smart move, giving someone a way to be wrong without feeling like they've been called out.
In professional English communication, protecting someone's dignity in the moment they're being corrected is often just as important as the correction itself. This is actually something that varies across cultures. Some cultures are more comfortable with direct public correction. Others, and this includes most Anglo-American professional cultures, tend to prefer correction that's delivered with a kind of exit for the person being corrected.
Valentina grew up in a culture where directness in professional settings is very normal. In a lot of Latin American professional environments, there's a warmth and a kind of emotional transparency that's totally accepted.
That's a really astute observation, and that cultural background actually makes the register collapse more understandable. Not an error of judgment, but an error power of translation. She translated a feeling, the urgent need for a pause, through the emotional directness that felt natural to her, without fully accounting for how that directness would read in a different cultural and professional context.
And it's interesting because the opposite can also happen. I've heard from learners who say that they come from more formal cultures, where you would never interrupt a superior ever, and so they end up not speaking in meetings at all. They hold everything in because they're afraid of getting the register wrong, and then they're seen as disengaged or passive.
Exactly. The challenge of register in a second language is two-directional. Sometimes you're too casual when you should be formal, and sometimes you're too formal, too stiff, too quiet, when the situation actually wants more energy and participation. Neither extreme serves you. The goal is flexibility, being able to move up and down that spectrum consciously and confidently.
And that only comes with what? Practice? Exposure? Both?
Both, and specifically, exposure to the language in context. This is actually one of the reasons we believe so strongly in the story format for this podcast. When you hear language used in emotional, vivid, specific situations, like Valentina in that conference room, you're not just learning the words, you're learning the context. You're learning what it feels like when those words land in that situation. And that emotional encoding, that feeling, that stays with you.
Grammar you memorize, stories you feel.
That should be on a poster somewhere.
I'm going to put that on a poster. Okay, I want to go back to Valentina for a second, because I think there's one more thing about her story that we haven't talked about yet. And it's not the mistake, it's what happened after.
What do you mean?
So she said, "Can you just stop?" She panicked. She thought she was going to get fired. And then she had a choice, right there in that silence, in that room. She could have apologized immediately. She could have collapsed the whole thing with, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." She could have tried to walk it back. But she didn't.
She moved forward.
She moved forward. She said what she needed to say. She made the correction. She did the work. And maybe that's actually part of why it worked. Because even if the words were wrong, the courage to continue was real.
That's beautifully put. And I think it touches on something that goes beyond language learning and into something more fundamental. There's a moment in every mistake, in language, in relationships, in anything, where you have a split second to decide, do I collapse into the mistake or do I continue through it? And those two choices lead to very different places.
Valentina continued through it, and she didn't even know that what she'd said had landed well. She just kept going.
Because she had something real to say, and she said it.
That is genuinely inspiring.
It is, and I think the lesson there isn't just about language, it's about how you handle the moment after the mistake, because mistakes are going to happen. If you're learning English or any language, mistakes are not optional. They're the mechanism of learning. The question is not, how do I never make a mistake? The question is, what do I do in the 3 seconds after I make one?
And collapsing into apology is not always the answer.
No, sometimes, and you have to read the room, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take a breath and continue. Not with arrogance, not pretending nothing happened, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they have something worth saying.
I love this. I love this conversation.
Me too, and this is why we do the show, honestly, because that moment, that 3-second choice Valentina made, that's not in any grammar book, that's not in any vocabulary list, but it's one of the most important things about communicating in a foreign language.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to do one more thing, because we've talked a lot about the mistake and the phrases and the cultural context, but I want to just do a quick recap for our listeners, because this episode had a lot of layers, and I want to make sure everyone leaves with something concrete.
Yes, let's do that.
So, Valentina's core mistake was what we called a register collapse under pressure. She used an informal, emotionally direct phrase, "Can you just stop?" in a formal, professional setting where a softer, more hedged phrase was expected.
The phrase was grammatically correct. There was no error in vocabulary or structure. The issue was pragmatic. It was about social and cultural appropriateness, about matching the level of formality in your language to the context you're in.
And we said that this often happens under pressure because when you're stressed, your brain reaches for whatever feels most instinctive, which might be heavily influenced by your first language, by the way things are expressed informally in your culture.
And the solution is not to feel ashamed of that. It's to build a library of go-to phrases for high-pressure
professional moments, phrases that feel natural enough that you can actually access them when you're stressed, not just when you're calm.
Phrases like, "Sorry, could I pause you there? I need just a moment. Can I add something here? Hold on, I want to make sure I'm addressing this correctly."
And we talked about softeners, words like sorry, just, actually, I wonder if, that don't make you sound weak, but actually show social intelligence. They signal that you're aware of the conversational moment and you're navigating it with care.
And finally, if you do say something that doesn't come out right, take a breath. And when it's possible and appropriate, keep going, because the courage to continue is part of the communication.
Beautifully summarized.
Thank you. I've learned a lot from you.
And I learn from you every week, honestly. The questions you ask, they're the questions the listeners would ask, and that matters.
Okay, so before we go, because this is one of my favorite parts of the episode, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from the people listening, because here's the thing. We have been talking about Valentina's experience, but I genuinely know that almost every single person listening has a version of this story.
Every English learner does.
You've been in a situation where you said something in English and it didn't come out the way you meant it, or you said something and you weren't sure how it landed. Or maybe, like Valentina, something completely unexpected happened because of a mistake you made.
So here's what we're asking. 3 questions. First, have you ever made a mistake in English that embarrassed you, surprised you, or changed a situation? Second, what happened? Tell us the story. We actually read these comments, and some of the most interesting stories we've ever heard have come from listeners sharing in the comments. And third, what did you do to fix it or to improve after? Did you look something up? Did you ask someone? Did you change the way you practice?
Because your story might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. You never know who's going to read your comment and think, oh, that's me. That's what I've been going through. And suddenly they feel less alone in this strange, beautiful, frustrating.
We are in this together. Every single one of us. Native speakers, learners, people in between. Language is a shared thing. Mistakes are a shared thing. And growth is a shared thing.
Drop your story in the comments. We genuinely love hearing from you. It's the best part of our week.
And if this episode resonated with you, if you felt something during Valentina's story, or if you learned something you're going to carry with you, please share the episode with someone who's learning English, or someone who loves language, or someone who once said the wrong thing in a meeting and is still thinking about it.
Because that person exists. That person is real, and they need this podcast.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Thank you for listening with your whole self, not just your ears, but your heart. That's what this channel was built for.
We'll see you next time.
See you in the next story.